Hey there! Today I'm going to show you how I made this gelatinous cube, and also how you can plus it into something that I call a Viscid. More on that later. To get started with this project, you're going to need a box. Something about the size of a ring box will do if you already have one lying around, but I didn't have a box, so I made my own. Once I had the pattern drawn out, I then transferred it to a piece of cereal box cardboard, and that way I could start bending it into shape. Mine is 45 millimeters around each face if you wanted to make it exactly the same size. Once I had the cardboard cut out, I covered the inside surfaces with some duct tape. If you have a large clear packing tape, that's going to work a lot better, but I don't have any, and I'll explain why you're going to need it in a little bit. So I've got my box, duct tape on the inside. I'm going to close it up by wrapping some duct tape around the corners on the outside. And once I've got the whole thing put together, we can then move on to our actual sculpting material, which for today is a thermoplastic. You've probably seen this stuff before in all kinds of forms. I'm using those little beads that as you heat up can be sculpted and molded into shape. And that metal lug nut that you see there, I'm going to be using that to give this thing a little bit more weight. I've got here 2 heat-proof bowls, and I'm only putting boiling hot water into one of them. The other bowl actually has some cold water in it to help my fingers out in case things get a little bit too hot. Once I've got some hot water poured into the bowl, I can actually start shaping the material. And to make sure that it actually bonds to itself, it has to stay hot. So be sure you have more water on standby just in case. But once I have a nice solid layer on the bottom of my box, I then add in my little nut, pour in some more hot water to keep the material nice and warm, and just keep building up layer by layer. If you work quickly, it will bond to itself. Being inside the box actually helps trap a lot of that heat because there's so much material in there. So once I had the whole thing filled up, this was the hardest part. I had to wait for it to cool down. After about an hour, when I thought it was cool enough, I still had to wait even longer. It was still warm in the center, but finally the whole thing was totally cooled and set. Now, about the duct tape. Mine has a texture on it, and so of course that texture transferred onto the cube, which I guess in a sci-fi setting might actually be kind of cool to have hexagons all over it, but I didn't want that, so I just heated it up again and smoothed it out using the top of my heat-proof jars. You could just use your fingers for this, any piece of glass that you have lying around, even the back of a spoon will work just fine, something just to smooth it out. As you can see, I made a couple of these cubes, and the reason for that is because I wanted to sort of upgrade one of them. I was inspired by some art that I found, but these guys are what I call Viscids. These are creatures that exist in a campaign in a world that I've been creating for some time now, and they're kind of like gelatinous cubes gone very wrong. One of the other great parts about this material is that it's actually really strong. As you can see, each of the limbs stay a little bit flexible. In fact, I actually dropped this thing while filming it and had a heart attack, but it was totally fine. It just bounced when it hit the ground. So to make each of the limbs, I'm heating up some more of that thermoplastic and just using my fingers to sculpt it into shape. I've used a couple of different tools while playing around with this stuff, and they're handy, but you can get most of the work done just with your hands. I'm just using hot water in order to show you guys that this is really simple to work with, but if you have a heat gun, that will give you a lot more control if you want to shape some of the joints. To attach each of the limbs to the cube, I'm heating up one surface of the cube and the ends of the joints, and then that way they can be attached. I can't stress enough that this material has to be hot in order for it to bind to itself. If the cube is too cold or if the limbs are too cold, they won't stick. But that's okay, because you can just reheat it anytime you want to. And in the case of my second little Viscid, I reheated pretty much almost the entire thing. The limbs were a bit too wonky, some were too small, some were too big, and so I just reshaped them until I was happy with them. And once I heated up the legs and reshaped them, I was much happier with it. Now, I hope this has inspired you to work with something you maybe haven't tried before, or just do a little bit more sculpting. This is a really simple, really fun project. It doesn't take more than an hour to put one of these things together if you don't include cooling down time for the cube. If you enjoyed this video or any of the work that I do, feel free to like and share it. If you subscribe, that would help the channel. If you'd like to help me directly, you can buy me a coffee. There's a link in the description. Until next time, cheers!